This is Evil West, Flying Wild Hog's new installment as an action-packed third-person shooter. Just to warn you, this will contain minor spoilers, so I'll tell you guys where to skip to in case you don't want to know any plot details. And let's go. Released back in November 2022, players are introduced to Jesse Rentier, a vampire hunter for the Rentier Institute and the main protagonist for the game. Playing as Jesse, you are tasked with taking on supernatural creatures, the vampires who aim to destroy all of humanity, so to speak, aka the Sanguisuge, if I said that correctly. However, you aren't alone on this journey. With the help of a retired agent called Edgar, your Institute Doctor Emilia, and your engineer Virgil, you apply the pressure and strike first, defeating a high-ranking vampire by the name of Peter DeBano, who is going to declare war on you in order to protect the Sanguisuge from a weapon in development that could pose a threat to them. After taking DeBano's head back to headquarters, the assault quickly backfires as Peter's daughter Felicity issues a reply, killing almost everyone there and taking back her father's head. Due to bad timing, a gauntlet capable of exposing the Sanguisuge is damaged and needs to be repaired, so you're sent out on a mission to gather the parts needed. And from then on, you're let loose into 1800s Western America. There's 16 chapters filled with a good mix of locations to explore. You've got cliffside overlooks, collapsed towns, the fiery insides of a zeppelin, water-reflecting caves, sub-zero outposts, sawmills faded out by fog, toxic swamps, and even spider-filled forests. Luckily for anyone with arachnophobia, there is an option to remove them if it gets too much. The developers scattered some pretty big black widows all over the floor, so I wouldn't blame you for turning this off. Now, in terms of the game's length, even though it only took me 10 hours to beat, accounting for deaths, me getting lost, backtracking, finding collectibles, it's not really that long, so on average you can expect a good 8 to 15 hours, depending on how well you pick up on everything. And whilst I said there's a series of locations you'll pass through on your travels, exploration is a bit of an understatement. I believe the developers said it themselves, all the levels are pretty linear. It's not open world in the slightest, there's no side quests, and besides heading to your next objective, the only other way you can get sidetracked is by looking for collectibles, things like lore and chests full of cash, with the latter being more important for your upgrades, which I'll talk about in a bit. This made the game a bit restrictive in some cases. It felt like everything was closed off. Sometimes I think certain areas are accessible, but oftentimes they're not. Places that look like that are just there for background scenery. Even areas that appear to look like you can jump down from or walk along are just blocked by invisible walls. You've got no choice but to stick to the route given to you, and even though there's no map, navigation is easy. I think I only got lost once or twice in the later chapters, but it didn't take too long to rectify. You're guided by these glowing chains that are often prompted for you to interact with, where you'd often be required to jump down somewhere, swing across a gap, duck under branches or rocks, squeeze through gaps, walk along thin beams, climb a ladder, or create a zipline for yourself to make your way to the next objective. I think this could have been a bit more adventurous, to be honest. It's not the end of the world, but it gives off this kind of old school platforming genre which some of you may like, it's simple. Occasionally there'd be more than one pathway. One obviously leads to the main objective and another takes you to a collectible or chest full of cash. I think the annoying thing about this was figuring out which route had the collectible, because if you take the objective route, oftentimes you can't go back, so you either have to restart from an earlier checkpoint or do the whole mission again. So yeah, just a heads up for you achievement hunters out there, I'd recommend following a guide to avoid missing stuff. But for me, I wanted to find as many collectibles as I could on my own, and choosing the wrong route always led to me missing a few. That, and I couldn't be asked to reset a checkpoint. Now when it comes to saving a checkpoint in this game, it's done very weirdly. It's not seamless like the Wolfenstein games where you could save pretty much anywhere at any time. For Evil West, the game auto-saves, but it saves your game at very big intervals, like at the start of a new mission or at the end, meaning there's no even spread of checkpoints within the mission itself. So your best bet would be to time it. If you want to take a break and it says your last save was a few seconds ago, you can safely leave. But if it says your last save was more than 10 minutes ago, you may as well do the next encounter to see if it's saved then, or finish the mission entirely, which is often verified once you hit a cutscene. I don't know why they've done it like this, because it's a bit inconvenient. They could have just given us a manual save option for more flexibility. If you're someone who plays for short periods of time, it's something to take note of, as you may find yourself having to replay sections again due to leaving a mission too early. But yes, back to the navigation. It's very basic, at least that's how it starts off in the early chapters, but I think it's typically done this way to separate the game mechanics. You spawn in, have to head to an objective by doing some parkour or puzzles, drop down into an open field or arena I should say, where you fight some enemies, then it's rinse and repeat. You can almost always tell when there's a battle approaching just by the way the area looks, how open it is, the TNT or spike cages about. It's a very basic design. You'll never see yourself having to do a task or timed event whilst fighting off enemies, whether that's powering up a door or creating a bridge for yourself. I think the game was missing that level of intensity and fluidity. Instead, everything is just segregated. You're only doing one or the other. You may also notice how you can't damage enemies until you jump into the arena, even if you can see them. And yes, there are some puzzles in this game. Sometimes you may have to push or pull a train carriage out the way to access a new area, electrify yourself for a short time to give power to a particular gate, or move stone platforms into a specific position. Again, quite simple, nothing too hard to figure out. It's not on the level of the Darksiders games. If you played those, you know how lengthy the puzzles were. They'd have you backtracking to and fro different platforms, jumping through mirrors or dimensions. That was some seriously challenging stuff. The Evil West is nothing like that, and that's not a bad thing. I believe the developers shifted their focus elsewhere, and that's the combat. It's initially what made me buy the game in the first place. Starting out with Jesse, you'll encounter a wide array of enemies, and they're split into 3 categories: Sanguisuges, monsters, and familiars. Sanguisuges are basically vampires, but also originally mutated versions of humans. Most of these guys are really sluggish when attacking and are therefore the easiest to take on. Monsters, however, are a lot more powerful. They're typically faster, stronger, have better ranged attacks that can incapacitate you temporarily, so you can expect these guys to be a bit of a challenge. They're not really ones to mess around with. Then you have familiars, which are just humans to be honest, however they can also be an issue. Most of them use ranged weapons and can shoot quickly. Bullets hurt you a lot in this game, especially at higher difficulties, so your best bet is fighting fire with fire in these cases. All of these enemies can be split into 4 groups. You've got the cannon fodder-like enemies such as the infected vessels, wasters, the boo hags, and the servant gunslingers, which are fairly easy to deal with and more so there to distract you from the bigger threat. Then you have ranged enemies such as the sharpshooters, screeching devils, or infected proteuses, which send these toxic worms that explode on you. Whilst these guys are still easy to take out due to their low health, their ranged abilities will cause you problems if you don't take them out quickly. Then you've got the slightly bigger enemies such as the Genu Giant or Zealots, which are essentially the brutes of Evil West that are more tankier than your regular enemies and will require a bit more power to take them down. And lastly, you have your mini-bosses such as Leechers, Vampire Highborns, Goros, Stalkers, or Carrion Husks, which are the most problematic of the 4 groups. They're bigger, have high health, and can pull off some devastating attacks if you're caught in them. I'll be honest, I thought these guys were the main bosses of each level, but since they don't have a boss health bar that usually appears across a player's screen, to indicate that it's a serious boss fight, they're considered just like any other enemy, which results in groups of them spawning in, especially in the end game. So you can imagine how chaotic the engagements are when you've not only got these bigger and more devastating enemies to deal with, but also the cannon fodder, the ranged enemies, and the brutes too. Now there are actual bosses in this game with multiple phases like the Brute and the Parasita, just to name a few. To be honest, there's only 4 bosses in this game, which makes sense since the game is very short. For those of you who like playing the Souls games where dozens of bosses are available to take on, don't expect much from Evil West in terms of that. Don't get me wrong, they're not easy fights. Your reaction speed is put to the ultimate test with these bosses, and some engagements have been so difficult, evasion was no longer the answer, which resorted to me having to cheese my way through fights by spam blocking. But since the number of bosses are lacking, I think the mini bosses are used here to fill the void, if that makes sense. But don't worry, Jesse has come prepared. He's a force to be reckoned with in this game. Starting out, you're limited to just the Gauntlet, your trusted melee weapon for this game, but it packs a hell of a punch. For a single yet simple weapon, the game teaches you a variety of attacks, from what would seem to be a barrage of boxing themed hooks, uppercuts, ground slams, and combining some of these attacks together would culminate into an even more powerful attack such as the Hero Punch or Cannonball Punch, which got me feeling like Ippo or Saitama in some cases. As you progress through the story, you'll unlock a revolver to not only give you a short range advantage, but also to pair this with your Gauntlet to keep enemies in the air for longer. It's like a combo filler. To give you even more range, you'll also unlock a rifle, a balanced weapon allowing you to get rid of those annoying enemies out of range, but also for hitting weak spots, which is great for cancelling an enemy attack and providing insta-kills. Based on the trailer for the game, I thought this would be your arsenal, the Gauntlet, the revolver, and the rifle, so I was prepared to take on the dozens of enemies that lay ahead. It felt like the gunslinging gameplay was comparable to that of Red Dead Redemption, minus the vampires obviously, and Remnant from the Ashes, with the latter being more similar. So if you played any of these two, you may take a liking to this game. But it doesn't stop there. As you play through the story, you'll unlock up to 7 other weapons that can be used for both offensive and defensive measures, such as the Boomstick, the heavy-hitting sawn-off shotgun, which is a must-have to blow away the competition, or the Scorcher, a basic weapon for setting your enemies ablaze to apply a damage over time effect. You've also got the crossbow, a faster firing weapon compared to the rifle with a higher magazine to pierce through your enemies. Of course, a personal favourite of mine, the Gatling, a slow wind up, and yes, your mobility is reduced as a consequence, but it indeed does come back with a vengeance. Most weapons can be reloaded, which is obviously slow and waste time, but ammunition regenerates over time. You build up ability energy through kills and other attacks, so the game encourages you to use a mix of these at once, rather than being heavily reliant on one or two weapons. Other defensive abilities like the healing dispenser built into the gauntlet can be used to regain health, or you can use things like the crippling tool that discharges a wave of electricity, stunning every enemy in the arena, leaving them open to attack. You've also got the zapper, an electrical shield attached to your left hand, which is not only capable of blocking projectiles and melee attacks, but it can be used to dash to or pull an enemy closer to you, isolating them so you can focus damage. What's more is all these weapons and abilities can be upgraded further to improve things like ammo capacity, effect duration, damage, health restoration, ramping up of other attacks, applying status effects, and even supercharging yourself. This is why you need to make sure you find as much cash as possible, as during your playthrough you won't have enough to upgrade everything, meaning you have to be selective and pick out the most effective ones for your playstyle. I think it's fair to say Jesse's signature weapon is the power to harness electricity, not just to conduct energy for puzzles, but also in combat. From quicker dodges to supercharged quake punches or touchdowns, you can even activate your supercharge mode to literally destroy everything in your path with massive damage. So there's definitely a lot to work with here. Despite there being a crazy amount of enemies all with unique and powerful attacks, you can really hold your own with Jesse. And that was the main selling point for me, meshing all these weapons and abilities together with the aggressive vampires and monsters in a confined space created some of the best combat experiences. Chaining attacks together, dodging, dashing, stunning, dishing out electrical storms, cannonballing enemies into each other, gave it that replay value. Although, the way your allies operate in missions can be quite odd. Characters like Edgar sometimes assist you in combat, like shooting or throwing explosives for example, but characters like Virgil won't, which is expected since he's not meant for field duty, but if he tags along in one of your missions, he'll wait for you to clear all the enemies, then randomly appear at your next objective with no visual explanation as to how he got there, only to just disappear again. I get what they're trying to do, I understand keeping characters involved in certain missions, but they're really forgettable in my eyes if they operate like this. As far as endgame goes, there is obviously New Game Plus where you can replay the game on a harder difficulty with your acquired and upgraded weapons from the first playthrough. And there's even a no death run. Luckily there's no achievement attached to the no death run, so this platinum may be a bit easier for you achievement hunters. The chapter select is very useful for added replayability of your favourite missions of course, but it also helps you navigate to a particular mission for any collectibles you may have missed. Although, I can't say I agree with the way this is done. As soon as you finish replaying a mission, instead of it taking you back to the chapter select screen, you're immediately sent back to where your last checkpoint save originally was, as if you were doing the story again. Maybe I'm just being picky, but it's a little annoying not having that option to go straight back to the chapter replay section. If anything, the execution on this was poorly done. The way it dismisses you is kinda jarring. Not only that, but whenever you replay a mission, you're not spawned directly into it. You have to go through the running around process, chatting to all the NPCs before actually starting. Again, something they could have filtered out. I personally preferred getting straight into the action. It just feels janky otherwise. But aside from that, once you complete and collect everything you want, there isn't much else to do apart from replaying missions or New Game Plus. Now there is an option for co-op, so you can play with someone, but I haven't heard good things about it. It operates very poorly. Firstly, you can only play with friends who own the game. There's no matchmaking, which is a bit annoying, but even if you have someone to play with, the progress is not shared. The host is the only one who gets progression for their story, and the second player joining is just there for the ride really. Player 2 gains nothing by playing with the host. I'd say if you have a friend who plays it, I don't see any harm in giving it a try since you won't really have much else to do after doing all the single player content. I believe achievements are shared though, and the game is pretty tough. I was playing on normal during my first playthrough and died a few times, so maybe having a second person would be handy for more difficult missions. I believe on the hardest difficulty, the weakest of enemies will kill you in 4 hits, and obviously that decreases with heavier hitters, so it's definitely worth a try if you have a friend to play with. If not, the Reddit community seems nice for this game, so you could find someone from there. Just to note, there is no crossplay co-op, so the person you're playing with needs to be on the exact same platform. What I would have liked to see or possibly see in the future is maybe an arena mode. Again, I think the weapons and abilities given to you make the gameplay so much fun, so having a wave-based mode, seeing how long you can last through an onslaught of enemies would be cool, and playing this with a friend would probably make it more interesting too. The only other thing to bring up would be the bugs. Now there are a few, but there was one in particular I wanted to mention, as it is very annoying. Sometimes when using the dash ability, it will send Jesse into the air, which seemed comedic at first, but occasionally this would make all the enemies in the area disappear, halting your progression. On one of these missions, I was forced to restart the whole mini-boss room again because of that, so just giving you guys a heads up. And obviously I did have some frame issues despite being on PS5. In the later chapters where multiple bigger enemies show up, I did notice a significant frame drop, but that only happened once or twice, so it's nothing major. But yeah, that is Evil West, a relatively short game with an okay storyline even though I didn't pay much attention to that, and the interface can be a bit inconvenient to use at times. What really grasped me was the gameplay, the explosive and stylish combat the game lets you do was what made me buy it, and it did deliver. The game is not the typical full price game in the £60 to £70 range, rather the base price was £45 and it dropped down to £35 on sale, at least for the disc version. Digital is obviously a little more expensive, but purchasing the disc version will grant you a cosmetic set, which is the golded out one I've been wearing throughout this review. That was a nice addition. At this rate, I don't see the game getting any future updates. It could just be those one-off games, but I personally would like to see some DLC centered on arenas, new story content, or improvements to the co-op system as well. If you are looking for a third-person shooter game focused on stylish, bloody gameplay with a mix of gun and melee ability combos, it's definitely worth it. But given how short it is, I'd wait for a sale. Paying anything under £30 would be a good purchase in my opinion. But for those of you who played Evil West, what did you think? Did you like the story, the gameplay, the co-op even? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. It's been Dre, take care and see you next time.